to the Dream 100 Show, the epicenter of influence, collaboration, and exponential growth. You're about to discover the power of relationships. Dream 100 relationships. And you're one relationship away from a totally different business and life. This is your host, Michael Tasner.
Hey there, and welcome to this week's episode of the Dream 100 Show. I am thrilled for our guest today. Jim Frawley has this amazing background. He's written books. He's a TEDx speaker. He's consulted with businesses of all different shapes and sizes, and he talks about a lot of interesting topics in ways that other quote-unquote gurus or consultants don't necessarily talk about. So, Jim, welcome to the Dream 100 Show. So happy to have you here.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited.
So I know this is a loaded question, but just to kind of give our listeners a little bit more about your background. I know that you've evolved and you've went from kind of working for other people to jumping into entrepreneurship to writing a book and speaking and having a radio show, podcast, et cetera. So you've had a fun journey, and I'd love our listeners just to get a little bit more context of your background and your story.
Sure. In a nutshell, my career started after college. I started in radio, paid zero money. So I jumped out of that and landed in a data analytics firm that did a lot of work with call centers, only because I couldn't get another job. Did that. That got me stuck in Omaha, Nebraska. The only way to get back from Omaha, Nebraska was to join a company that had a presence back on the East Coast, which is where I'm from. And that landed me in the financial industry for about 15 years. Did that range of roles, chief of staff, public relations, investor relations, managed PR for the banks through the financial crisis, where I really, earned my teeth. And after moving around in the financial industry for a number of years, I realized it wasn't for me. Corporate wasn't for me. And so I started putting together business plans. What could I do on my own? And ended up hearing about a coaching program at Columbia University, which was part teacher's college, part business school. Saw that, jumped in. The next day when I finished, I quit, stayed on for 2 quarters. And that was 8 years ago. The rest is history.
Maybe give us something from the financial days, and we don't have to go into lots of stories there, but a lot of our listeners have had to deal with heavy PR challenges of whatever happening. Could you give us an example of how you, and I can't even imagine that, of doing the PR for financials and banks when everything is literally blowing up all around them? How did you handle that, or how did you kind of process everything that was going on at the time to kind of aim to help the financials and the banks come on the other side of that?
Yeah, it was overwhelming. And on reflection, it was also where I just learned the absolute most. I was very fortunate to be working for a company with these incredible executives in place. And you scramble, right? And you have to come up with not just what the spin is, because we weren't putting on spin. It's how do you communicate to everyone? There were 3 audiences. You've got your employees who didn't know what was happening, and we work for the banks and what's going to happen. There were the investors. Is my money safe with your company? Should I invest in your company? Because banks were failing left and right. And then you've got the customers who entrust the money with you. And so the message is the same, but the nuance in talking to them to alleviate their fears, making sure they're comfortable, was so eye-opening with how masterfully some of these executives did it. And on reflection, what I remember most, or probably what I learned most, is the executives who were successful and survived this massive downturn, this massive amount of change. And this informs a lot of the work I do today is no matter what the macro change is, the individual has to respond appropriately. They needed a belief system in place. And that happened well before any kind of downturn. These individuals, these men and women, were comfortable with what they were saying. They believed in what they were saying. And that made my job so much easier as we were navigating the challenges.
A lot of really great kind of one-liners and pieces that I hope our audience is grabbing from that. I mean, the first one that I love that you shared is a lot of us think when we have a PR challenge that the only thing that you have to manage or keep in mind or respond to would be your customers. But what is your staff thinking, to your point? And if you're not communicating to your team, hey, here's what happened, here's how we're planning on addressing it, and providing coaching, support, mentorship for your staff, that can start to unravel a different way. And similarly, if you're a company that has investors and you're not communicating to that audience, where if the financial institution's only focused on, let's just talk to our customers and let them know the money is safe, but over here, the investors are getting ready to jump ship and all the staff is thinking about quitting and leaving, I mean, that would just only amplify the situation. The other key piece that I love that you just shared, and I know you talk a lot about this in all the work that you currently do, and the bellwether method that you have kind of coined and started to teach organizations, but it's focusing that change on the individual rather than like taking a step back and just, great, how do we manage this change? But as you said, if the individual, the executive, the leaders, that they don't believe it, if they don't have their mindset right and they're not right internally, it's not going to reflect. It's not going to be authentic, to your point, and is only going to make matters worse.
Yeah, completely. I mean, when we think about the different audiences, most of the challenges we face when we're dealing with a PR crisis, when we're dealing with any of this stuff, VUCA environments, like the volatility, the uncertainty, all of that stuff, the challenge is effectively emotional. So no matter what logical steps you have in place, whatever logical answers you have to a particular challenge, you have to connect with individuals on this emotional standpoint. And emotion is completely unique to the individual. So if you've got employees, and we see it a lot now with all the layoffs that are happening and the change with AI and all of that good stuff, there is a fear driving them. We only have like 7 or 8 core emotions. And if there's fear driving that, they're not focused on their work. They're focused on their family. How am I going to support them? How am I going to do that? Investors, how are we going to talk to our investors, right? And what are we going to do about the money and all of that? And so when we think about macro change, and that's why we came up with the bellwether method, is I sat and thought, when we look at executive development, it really focuses on 3 areas. You've got your strategic plan, which evolves constantly. You've got your communication, your executive communications, and then you've got your ability to respond to change in the moment and make really good decisions in the moment. And as I sat back, there's no executive development program that's really covering the emotional side of this, right? How do you focus on you? How do you have a belief system in place, a philosophy in place that allows you to make the effective decisions when the time really, really comes? That work happens in advance. If you're waiting until the time it happens, you're kind of behind the 8 ball. It's a little difficult to do that. So being curious, having that belief system and recognizing that your beliefs are not truths. Your wisdom from previous experiences are almost irrelevant to the new challenges that are coming. They can inform your decisions, but how do you ask really good questions? How do you become curious to make sure that you're evolving the people around you to where they actually need to be?
I love the thought process of, if you're not doing all of this work beforehand and then something happens, your organization is getting ready to go through massive change, whether that's layoffs or the opposite side where you're getting ready to expand rapidly. But as you said, if you haven't done that pre-work and kind of been evolving and working with your team on that, when that change happens, it's going to be a heck of a lot more challenging and I would assume disruptive. If you're just, well, okay, great, we're getting ready for some change next week, so let's talk about this, when, to your point, I mean, this should have been a conversation and work that has been happening many, many months, if not longer than that.
Yeah, I mean, we use the words constantly, you need trust as a leader. You need all this stuff as a leader, all these buzzwords, but that is earned. And we all know when we interact with people, whether they're leaders in an organization or not, or business partners or coworkers or friends, community, when you interact with someone who just kind of has it, right? They're comfortable, they're calm under pressure, they're comfortable with whatever decision they're making. You know that their mind is going and they know what steps that they're going to have to take when that time comes. And every incremental step, they may not know where it's going to end, but they know that they're capable of doing something in the moment. That is a solid amount of work on an individual level that you have to be comfortable with yourself in order for other people to believe it. And that's where leadership really starts. We always talk about the external factors of leadership. We talk about attributes of good leaders that we've seen, but a lot of people don't talk about the internal churn that comes from leadership, and how do you quell that churn? How do you ask yourself the really good questions in order to make sure that you're comfortable and gaining that trust so people will hitch their wagon to you?
I love it. I love that phrase also, have your team and your people hitch their wagon to you. And you use the phrase in the moment many times. So way back when I wrote my first book, it was called Marketing in the Moment. And the premise was to meet your prospects exactly where they are and be in the moment, in the stage with them. But I love how you're describing the emotions in the moment and being able to respond in the moment, because these things are kind of coming at you rapidly. It's not something that you can just say, great, I think your feelings are valid, let me think about it and get back to you in a couple of weeks. That you need to have the ability to respond in the moment and in the right way, obviously. If I go back to the journey of you making the decision to kind of leave, I don't want to use the word cushy job, but you obviously had a lot of really great positions. I'm sure you were doing really well. What was a hinge point or tipping point that kind of pushed you over the edge to say, hey, I want to go the entrepreneurship route rather than kind of stay in corporate America, so to speak?
Yeah, the last job I had in corporate, I started it. And within 2 weeks, it was like, this is the same thing in a different place. Like we go through these cycles in corporate where you sign up for a new job. It's nice for the first, 2 quarters, maybe 3. You're getting used to things. You're making your relationships. Then you have about a year of like good influence and you're still kind of excited. And then after that, it's like, all right, here are the thing, like the shine comes off and it's like, okay, fine. Like what are we really doing? And I was just tired of that kind of cycle. I've been through 4 companies. It wasn't resonating with me in the right kind of way. And I realize now it's all because of me. It wasn't because of the environment. It wasn't because of the managers. It wasn't because of any of those types of things. It was really about me not knowing the questions to ask in the moment. I wasn't asking the right questions to develop myself. I wasn't challenging myself in the right kind of way. And when I left, became a coach, you get certified in assessments. What I found, one of the assessments told me that I apparently am very hostile to authority. And that is probably why I never really wanted to stay in corporate. I looked at all my reviews. It jumped off the page at me. If you look at all my 360s and all my corporate time, I always got 5 out of 5, 10 out of 10, except for one person. And it was always my direct manager. And so subconsciously, I must have been treating that person in a very different way. And so realizing that now, if I went back to corporate today, I would have a completely different experience based on what I know, based on the work that I've done and all of those things. So I think I just wasn't a good fit for that kind of structured environment at the time, probably because I didn't know who I was and what I wanted and the work. I wasn't really willing to do the work on myself. I was more focused on the external things that were happening to me.
Love it. No, that's all really good takeaways for people to think about. So if you're in corporate America, or if you have a job, there's always innate ability that just that kind of, not even an itching desire, but that thing in your mind that's like, and I'm in a very similar boat of you where I've danced between having other gigs and entrepreneurship and the same kind of thing where I think it would say, doesn't have respect for authority or what, I don't think that was the exact word, or like the chain of command that he would always like jump 5. So if I wasn't getting an answer from a supervisor, I would jump 5 job titles above and go to the president of the organization and be like, hey, this needs to change. Or like, hey, there's all these other layers between us. And I never understood that with corporate.
Yeah.
So the Dream 100, as you know, it's all about relationships in life and in business. And I know you've had a lot of transformational experiences and you've talked a lot on your podcast and in your teachings just about everything in your life and you do it in a real raw way. Has there been a relationship or 2, either kind of personal or professional, that has changed the trajectory of your life and or business? And kind of talk us through that a little bit.
Yeah, the obvious one on the personal side, which I can also say is a business side, she calls herself my chief marketing officer, would be my wife. When I met my wife, I was already frustrated in corporate. I was doing fine, right? I was doing the work. I was, going to work every day, getting there at 7, leaving at 7, like doing all the crazy hours. But she was the first person where I really felt like there was an opportunity that I could do more. Like she was the first person I really feel like believed that I could do it. And she encouraged me to do it. She saw that I was miserable in corporate. She saw that I didn't like what I was doing. So she was almost a catalyst for me to say, look, she introduced me to the coach that I went to go talk to when I was thinking about putting together these business plans. She was the one who actually heard about the Columbia program that I went into and ended up doing that. So she was, she kind of pushes me from behind the scenes in really good ways, but she knows me incredibly well. She was the first where I said, you know what? I don't have to follow the script that's been laid out. I don't have to do the thing that's, what I think is expected of me, that I have to go do these typical normal things. And she was incredibly supportive. And when you have that type of belief in you, it opens up a world of possibilities. And so that was the one really big catalyst. The second big catalyst, also personal, I would have to say was when we had our daughter, because I had already had my business for a few years. It was fine, right? I was doing whatever. I was making a little bit of money. It wasn't crazy, but it was fine. But as Isabel, my daughter, started getting older, I started to see the person that I was. And I said, this isn't going to work. Like, this isn't sustainable. I'm not being the dad I want to be. I'm not being the husband I want to be. And so that put me down this whole trajectory. I quit drinking. I quit doing a lot of the things that were impacting me or holding me back, self-sabotaging all of the things that I could do. And that was the second catalyst that really threw my business to the business tripled almost overnight, with the clarity of thinking that I had, the focus that I had, the energy that I had just by giving up, going out every couple of nights, every week, just freed up so much stuff for me. So those two on a personal level were huge catalysts. And then I've got other business relationships that, supported me when I was, giving me clients and introducing me to people. And I had, a decent reputation with people that I had built that trust over time, which was great. I didn't know I had it, but getting the realization that the business relationships were actually in place was incredibly helpful too.
Hi, I'm going to come back to the business piece in just a second and ask a clarifying question or two there. But I want our listeners to take note of what you just shared. So the Dream 100 concept, the Dream 100 framework, it's not simply, great, you need to go and line up 100 relationships that can refer lots of business to you. The whole premise is a relationship that can completely transform your life and or your business. And as Jim just said, and you might not think about, well, how is a Dream 100 relationship a wife or their daughter, for example? It's the overarching, the emotions that end up starting to change your thinking, your habits, and moving you in that right direction. So I don't want you just to think that it's all about business. I've been talking a lot in this podcast about, personal relationships. If you look at your kids, what if your kids had a Dream 100 set of relationships? And that could be certain colleges they're trying to get into and building those relationships and building relationships in athletics and internships. But if you look at, Jim's wife, she then started to connect him. So if it wasn't his wife and that was a Dream 100 relationship, regardless, it's the power of relationship, the power of connection. And one thing happens and then something else happens and it starts to stack and compound right in front of you. Your life and your business start to change. And they do go hand in hand. A lot of, and I know, Jim, you talk about this all the time, that it's the entrepreneur, it's your inner self. You can't think that business is just business and the relationship stuff doesn't matter, or the personal stuff, or my mindset and all of that. So you're, living proof of that exact concept. If I look at the business piece, I was interested when you said you started to then build on relationships and trust that you didn't already know was there. How did you either nurture those relationships? How did you reignite those relationships? And then after that piece, are there some things that you've done to nurture those relationships and going forward?
So there's a guy I worked with. His name was Anthony, an Australian guy, really good person. He went out on his own a few years before me. And so he heard that I had launched my own business and he said, let's grab coffee. We went, we hung out, and he gave me one piece of advice that stuck with me. And it was so helpful. He said, you have to build a personal board of directors. Right? You have to find these people who only want the best for you, who are going to challenge you, aren't going to be competitors, aren't going to use you for your own designs or anything else. And I thought about who would those people be in my life. And I never thought about relationships in that kind of way. I'm not a very good relationship person, right? I'm kind of an introvert. I like to stay at home. I sign up for an event and I'm like, do I really have to go? Like that kind of thing. But when I'm there, it's great. And so I started to think about who around me are people that I admire, that do amazing things, that could give me really good advice. And when I started just writing out the list, it got really, really long. You'd be surprised at the amount of people that are just so amazing. And so I sat there, like my buddy Larry, who does Ironman triathletes with me, will just sign up and just do anything, is an amazing insight. My buddy Sean, who I met through networking, each time I meet with him, I start thinking differently about my business. Other people, old bosses, when I wrote the book, I had to reach out to some of these old executives and say, hey, can I get a quote for the book? One of the most anxiety-inducing things to do. We're so kind with their time. Everybody wants to help somebody else. And when I had that realization, one, have a bit of humble pie to say, look, I'm not selling you on anything. I just want to come and ask questions. I'm launching a business. And that was good advice too. So I went to a financial advisor I know. He's in the family, very successful. I said, look, I'm not pitching you on my business. I want to come and give the sales pitch and get your feedback on the sales pitch. It's a learning process. And then when they see what your philosophy is, with no pressure of, selling anything, I'm not a hard seller. And the way that I go to people is I don't want your business unless it's going to be good for you. And so in meeting people, they say, look, I know someone who could benefit from this. Let me make the introduction. I know, your 100 people that you meet, they all know 1,000 people. And so you don't necessarily have to sell the 100 people next to you. But when you are putting your best foot forward and they are able to make the introductions for you, your ability to scale your business is suddenly very simple because you've earned the trust of the people that have made the introduction. And so making that long list, I could just say, this is an easy conversation, because you know them already. And you can have these conversations and develop it in a different type of way.
And I love that you said you let people know, hey, I'm not here to pitch you. I just want to ask some questions. And that's why doing things like this, having them on a podcast, going and having lunch, interviewing them. It's a much different conversation than that whole, hey, can I have, 10 minutes of your time to pick your brain? But you're using a phrase of, I'd love to interview you. Here's what I'm trying to accomplish. And nothing to sell you. I just would love love to interview you. And it changes that frame very quickly. Do you have, I know you're an avid reader and have a lot of really cool things that you've written yourself. Is there a favorite book or two that you would recommend to our listeners?
Yeah. I've got so many favorite books. The first one that really put me on the trajectory of becoming a coach and changing my business and everything else, we lost power during Hurricane Sandy, so I just burned through this book. It was Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman.
That's a great book.
It's a great book. And it changed my perspective in terms of the fact that your script isn't dictated for you, right? You can change the wiring in your brain. You can do different types of things. You can adjust based on the types of questions you ask and all of that. So that was a phenomenal one. Another one I love to recommend, which people laugh when I say it, you can read it in an afternoon, is Alice in Wonderland, which is one of the smartest books I've ever read. The quotes in it are so meaningful. Like when someone says, tell me your story, she only starts at the beginning. And they say, well, why don't you go to the beginning of the day? They say, well, why don't you talk about yesterday? She said, because I'm a different person today. And it's meaningful to do that. She asked for directions. She said, well, where are you trying to go? She goes, I don't know. I just need directions. Well, then go left or right. It doesn't matter because you don't know where you want to go. Like there's a lot of metaphors in there that if you sit and you think and you reflect on it, has major impact to strategic decisions that you want to make and taking the pressure off and just enjoying the ride. And so I love to recommend Alice in Wonderland too. That's another good one.
No, that's I've never had that recommendation from anyone or have seen, but I love books like that have really great one-liners that have you could do a 5,000 word article or a journal entry or a video just on and self-reflect on. That's interesting. When I've seen the movie, we actually in our house in Orlando, we have a whole Alice in Wonderland room. So I think I'm going to have
now you have to read it. You have to.
Yeah, now I've got to read it. No, definitely. No, that's I like that. No, that's interesting. When I recommend a lot of children's books, I'm a big Dr. Seuss fan. So like, Oh, the Places You'll Go is a classic one as well. But final question I have for you is around legacy. And you can answer this in any way that you would like, but looking back, I mean, how do you want people to remember you? What are some things or one thing that you want to be remembered by?
It's a really good question. I've struggled with this a lot. Some people have come to me, why don't you hire more people and build a dynasty and do that so that it can live on beyond you? And I'm not at that point. I don't think that's something that I necessarily want to do. I think my simple desire is I want to be remembered as someone not with purpose, but as someone who was useful. I want to be useful. There's nothing I love more than seeing someone accomplish something they didn't think that they could accomplish. So there are so many things I don't want to do. There's so many clients I turn down because I'm just not the right fit. Like I have to be excited about the people that I'm working with. I probably won't ever do another Ironman, but if somebody wants to do an Ironman because they don't think they can do it, I will sign up with them and I will do it with them because that's much more exciting than the idea of doing it. And that's really the legacy I would hope I can do, is that I was somehow useful and helpful to other people. And that's really it. It's one spin on the planet. I don't need a dynasty. I don't need to build this crazy kind of monstrous things. We're fortunate, we're good, and I want to be useful to people. And that's what makes work tons of fun, is when it's not purpose, it's usefulness.
Love it. Where can our listeners go to learn more about you? Grab your book, for example. Where can they go and learn a little bit more about the Bellwether Method if they're looking at that as well?
Sure. So the website is jimfrawley.com. That's got stuff on the Bellwether Method and what we do. It's got the podcast. The podcast is called Jim's Take. We've got about 120. Today just went out the 125th episode. All kind of everything from why I quit drinking to the latest one is a seat at the table. What does that actually even mean? We'll talk about that. So that, and then the book is Adapting in Motion, Finding Your Place in the New Economy. How do you prepare for change when you don't know what change is coming? It's available Barnes & Noble, Amazon, all those good places. And then by the end of this year, we will have a new book out on building an executive philosophy. So that's the next one.
I like that. Love it. There you guys had it. Make sure you go and check out Jim's website. I'll make sure that it's linked here below as well for you. Go and check out his website, grab his book. He's got I already listened to A Seat at the Table. That was another great episode that you did as well. So
thank you,
Jim. It was a pleasure having you here, and hope you continue to be useful and make some massive impact.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.